Hello there and welcome back to Tatooine Tableflip. I'm Jimmy and today we're going to be looking at Conan the Miniatures Game from Monolith Games. I'm going to grab a cup of tea and then we'll get to it. Conan is a scenario-driven miniatures game designed by, among others, Frederick Henry, Antoine Bauza, and Bruno Cathala. Plunging you headlong into the violent, sometimes supernatural world of Conan and his allies, the game moves at a brisk pace, driving you mercilessly to either a rousing victory as you crush your enemies and see them driven before you so you can relish the lamentation of their women, or cuts you down in a staggering defeat. The game is brutal, but ridiculously enjoyable. If you've been watching the show at all, you've heard me talk a lot about how into science fiction I was as a kid. I just had little interest in anything else. I mean, a super spy who saves the world and always gets the woman? As a kid, I thought that sounded boring. And a hobbit? What's a hobbit? And wait. You're telling me a giant over-muscled, half-naked man is running around a fantasy setting, chopping people up with a sword? That's just utterly ridiculous. As a teen, I was turned on to the Conan stories by a friend of mine who thought I'd really dig them. And I looked up to this guy so much that I went out of my way to try to love them. I really did. Even buying Conan comic books thinking it would be the least painful way to absorb the stories. However, since I wasn't into Dungeons and Dragons or any of that stuff yet, I really lamented the fact that I hadn't bought Spider-Man. It wasn't until 1982 when the Conan movie came out that I found myself with more of an appreciation for the character and set about reading the actual stories. I found myself enthralled, and suddenly I discovered I liked fantasy just as much as I did my beloved sci-fi. Fast forward a bajillion years, and here I am with this massive Conan Miniatures game. I mean, holy cats, look at all this stuff. And this is just the retail version. The King level Kickstarter came with a whole separate box full of gear. It's amazing. In the game, you and your friends decide who are going to play the heroes and who are going to play the enemies. And you battle your way through scenario after scenario in the hopes that eventually one of you will win the day. Win the day? Who talks like that? Anyway, here's how it works. As I said before, there's two sides to the game, the heroes and the enemies. And each of them play a little differently than the others, so we'll start with the heroes first. You and your friends control Conan and his allies, bashing your way through scenario after scenario, as long as your endurance holds out. This is represented by these little crystals that you move around to any of the myriad action panes on your board, paying 1 for 1 for dice to roll against that action. At the end of your turn, you'll slide the gems into your fatigue zone, where they'll stay until the recovery phase, where you can possibly recover some, but the caveat is you probably won't recover as many as you've spent. Each board has a myriad of actions, more on that later, that you can actually split with your friends. So for instance, Conan can move, and then your friend can attack, and then Conan can attack, and then someone else can perform an action. And you keep going until either you run out of crystals, they're all over your board, or you stop and reserve a few for what ultimately is going to be some kind of nastiness that the enemies are going to rain down upon the heroes. For instance, let's say that I wanted to move and attack with Conan. His base move is 2, so I can just move 2 areas without spending any gems. However, if I'd like to move farther than that, I would have to spend gems to the action pane, 1 per area I move beyond his base. To attack, I would also spend gems, in this case, let's say 3, to the attack pane, and it's 1 per dice, so I gain 3 dice. I'd roll and make my attack, and then maybe kill some guys, or, he used his superpower of bashing through a wooden wall and killing everyone in the room before he bounds off to find something else to smash. Let's go over the player dashboard, shall we? This is your reserve zone, and this number down here denotes how many gems you begin the game with. This is your fatigue zone, as I pointed out earlier. Once you spend the gems out for actions, they return here before being recovered. This is your damage zone. As you take damage, you'll be peeling gems from various places on here and placing them there. It's possible to recover them using potions and the like, but if all of your gems end up in there, your character is dead and you're out of the game. Each of these 6 panes are the actions you can take. This first one is the movement, with his base being 2, as I pointed out before, but each of the characters could possibly have a different amount base. This is manipulation. In this game, there's simple and complex manipulations. Simple manipulations don't require a gem, but complex do, because typically they'll have some kind of a target number that you have to meet or beat. This is your die reroll action. You spend a gem into there for every die you'd like to reroll that you've previously rolled. This is the melee attack action with a red die. Each gem I spend into there gives me a red die to perform the action. This is my ranged combat action, and it works exactly the same as the melee action. This is my guard action. This action I would take on my friend's turn. If I'm being attacked, I can spend gems into there, gaining a red die for each. And the successes this time, instead of translating into hits, they translate into defense. I could potentially take 0 damage. Each of these 4 has a red number in the corner, for instance, in this case, 5. That means it's the maximum amount of gems that pane can hold until the end of the turn, when they clear off and land in your fatigue zone. Down here we have, it's tiny, I don't know how well you can see it, but this is an encumbrance number. It's one of the neatest mechanics in the game. As you gain items opening treasure chests and whatnot, you gain encumbrance. As you become encumbered, you could potentially lose speed or shut off any of these skills, as you can see by the red numbers. Once you hit that encumbrance, that skill is no longer usable. And this number is the limit to your encumbrance. Speaking of these skills, these are all defined very nicely by these cards. You can see there's a bunch of them, so I won't go through them. But as I pointed out, as you become more and more encumbered, you no longer can perform those skills. These 2 areas are your stances. You have an aggressive stance and a relaxed stance. If you're aggressive, you can do any of these actions. If you're relaxed, you can't do anything basically but stand there, but you recover more gems. Each of the 2 stances also allow for a higher recovery of gems depending on how many of the other heroes have been killed. This is a really fascinating stripped-down version of a resource management mechanic that I just adore. It's fantastic. Okay, let's talk about the Overlord's turn. This is the Book of Skelos, and is one of the slickest mechanics I have ever seen in a game. It's really neat. Watch this. This card represents a group of enemies, as denoted by the color of its border. You can see we have base inserts, so they match. We know what group goes to this card. It has some of their stats like their defense and their attack, etc. These are all slotted in to this part of the board called the river. When a group activates, the Overlord has to spend whatever amount is above the slot of the group he wants to activate. Let's say in this case, 1. The group activates, we perform the actions with the group, and then we slot the card in at the opposite end of the river, sliding everything else down. This particular card with a crow on it denotes certain events that the scenario might call for, and it also, once you've activated it, would return to the end of the river. When a group is wiped out, the card is flipped to the bloodied side and is automatically sent to the end of the river, where it is now ineligible to be used. Each of these cards has a reserve number down here at the bottom. If you spend the reserve number in gems, you can actually bring figures back into the game, and there will be reserve points on the board, allowing you to flip this card back face up, and then they can be reactivated. Oh, the components! Look at all this stuff. The boards are huge, they're massive, and they're double-sided, giving you 4 huge environments to play through. The minis are all really high-quality plastic and carry a fantastic depth of detail, except for the hero minis. The strange choice to mold them in not just a different color, but a different kind of plastic makes them softer, and they suffer lack of detail compared to all of the other enemy minis. The cards are all really, really high quality and should put up with a good amount of play, but like I've said before, I sleeve everything, so mine are gonna last forever. The dice are fantastic quality. I love the dice. They're really, really well made. The Book of Skelos. I'm dumbfounded why the player dashboards aren't made out of the same little molded plastic. But these things would be fantastic. And look at this, just a gajillion tokens. Most of them aren't even used in the base set for any of the included scenarios. I'm guessing some of them are probably for scenarios down the road. But still, there's just a huge amount. There's so much stuff to this game. I'm just completely gobsmacked. This is my least favorite component in the game. Even though it's nice and glossy and it's laid out fairly well, the problem is that it feels like there's chunks missing. And it feels like those chunks are probably significant chunks. We stumbled our way through and managed to figure out most everything we had an issue with. But eventually we did have to retreat to the forums at Board Game Geek and ask for help. Once we had some insight into the missing or poorly worded bits, then the game was actually ridiculously simple to play and is way more fun than it has any business being, considering that it's a game about hack and slash and kill and death and maiming and etc., etc. I really enjoyed this game, and so did everybody in my group. Despite the problems we had with the rulebook during our first playthrough, they wanted to play it again immediately, and we've been playing it every chance we get. It's just ridiculously good. All of the artwork is fantastic. The components are really high quality. Tons of minis and tons of tokens. Everything you need to play and play and play. For all of that, this game has absolutely earned its spot on my game shelf. Hey, that's it for this time. If you guys like the show, why don't you give us a thumbs up down there and subscribe to the channel. That way you don't miss any of the new episodes as they come out. You can find us online at www.boardgamerblues.com, or you can send us a message at either Facebook or Twitter @BoardGamerBlues. Or hey, send me a message by email directly. It's JIMMIE@BoardGamerBlues.com. And if I'm not seeing my enemies driven before me and listening to the lamentation of their women, I will see you next time on Tatooine Tableflip. Thanks for watching, everybody. Bye.